Good morning, folks. My name is Prasanna Karyawansa. I'm a program educator with the Trauma Informed Care team at the LWK. I'm really excited to be presenting this session to everyone who's watching. And I'd like to introduce Holly, who's also going to present with me.
Thanks, Prasanna. Hi, everyone. I'm Holly Murphy, and I'm the Advanced Practice Leader with Trauma Informed Care at the LWK. First, we'd like to acknowledge that we are in Mi'kma'ki, the traditional and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. We would like to acknowledge this as we individually and collectively work together as systems towards truth and reconciliation, and we want to acknowledge we are all treaty people. This presentation today is a partnership, so it is between the IWK Health Center and the Department of Education and Early Childhood Education. So our thoughts were really, how do we support the staff and the great work that you do, knowing that these are unprecedented times, and we really want to be here for you and support you in the great work that you do every day. You may be home watching this presentation, or you may be at school with a group of people, or you may be individually by yourself. So we really want you to take the opportunity today to find a comfortable place, whatever that may be for you. So if it's, sitting in a chair on your couch, again with others, wherever that is, please make yourself comfortable. Take one thing at a time, recognizing we all are learners. There may be some information that is quite familiar to you and some information that may be new. We want you to reflect on your supports. So thinking about who are your support people at home and at work. If you have someone that you can talk to after the session that you may want to connect with, thinking about those supports that you have. And take a break when you need to. So the beauty of this session is that it is recorded, so you can stop it at any time and kind of take time to grab a drink, do whatever you need to do to take care of yourself, because we are going to be talking about stress. And at any point that you need to have a break, please do that. We encourage that. Today we have a few learning objectives that we want to cover. We're going to be looking at the 6 psychological factors for health. We're going to be looking at how do we support staff in these practices to be healthy, and what strategies can you do. So we will have some practical strategies to look at. And we're also going to create a resiliency plan. So this plan may be something throughout the session that you just reflect upon, that you think about. What are you currently doing? What do you want to do? Or it may be something that you actually want to write down, and we do have a resource that will be available for that. So first things first, put on your own oxygen mask first. We know that teachers, support staff, people in the education system have a lot on their plate right now, and we really want to acknowledge that. So we want you to take care of yourselves first. If we think about it in the context of going on that lovely vacation we wish we could go on right now, we're thinking about it in the way of, we're told, you have to put on your oxygen mask first before you assist anybody else. And it's the same kind of premise within the work that we do as well. We need to be taking care of ourselves in order to take care of anyone else. And also in the pandemic, it could mean our literal masks. So we're really looking at how do we stay safe within the context of what we're doing in a pandemic? How do we do that safely? How do we do that confidently? How do we know what we're doing? And really doing that, again, we have to do that for ourselves before we can do that for others. And what we really want to convey too is that it's really important that we're taking care of ourselves and each other. We want to be the best people that we can be. We want to be present with our family and friends. We want to feel that we have this under control, that we have our stress under control, and we want to also do the best job that we can while we're at work, taking care of ourselves, our coworkers, our students, and their families. So really thinking about how do we do that in a way that makes sense. So one way we can do that, and a premise that we're going to think about as we go through the presentation, is really thinking about how do we look at things, what is in our control. So thinking about what our stressors are, what is in our control, what can we do about it? Is it in our control? Because maybe it's not. Maybe it's we have to talk to someone else about it, maybe we have to get them to influence it to help change it, or maybe we have no control or influence over it at all, and we have to kind of let it go. And sometimes that can be really hard. Maybe it's letting it go for a certain period of time, maybe it's letting it go for good. So really examining that, really thinking about what does that mean, and we'll talk about that a bit more as well. So again, focus on what you can control, advocate for what you can influence, and accept what you can't control or influence. So these are the 6 psychological factors that we'll be going throughout the presentation, and we'll speak about each of them in more in depth. So first we're going to look at how we acknowledge and understand the function of stress. We're going to understand what is causing the stress, and then look at it from the premise of what is in our control, what's in our influence, and what can't we control or influence. We're going to look at what's going well. So there may be a lot of things in our life that is going well, but we're actually focusing on what isn't going well. And sometimes that can be a hard thing to do, but it is a really good thing to focus on what is going well and think about what we're grateful for in that piece as well. We're going to next reduce our exposure to stress, because a lot of times we are going to have to deal with the stress that we have to deal with, but there's some stresses that we may be taking in that we don't have to focus on as much. Maintain our healthy family and close relationships, because that's really important, and create predictability. So we'll go through each of these in depth and kind of go through those. So what maybe we be able to control and influence, looking at acknowledging the function of stress. So if we think about stress, stress is really vital. It's an evolutionary response. So when we think back to the cave people days, they saw that saber-toothed tiger, they were thinking like, oh my, I need to do something. They were either gonna fight, flight, or freeze, right? They were either gonna run if they could outrun the tiger. They were going to basically get in the ball and kind of hope the tiger didn't see them, or they're going to fight it. And that was a really helpful thing, because they had to really do that quickly. Just like us today, if we happen to kind of step out and we all of a sudden notice this car coming towards us, we're going to really quickly get back up on the sidewalk, right? And so stress really does play an important function, really saving our lives and keeping us alive, and that is really evolutionary. When we think about stress, it also can be positive. Right? So there's lots of things that we experience in life that a little bit of stress is good, like today for me, for this presentation. So really a little bit of stress is good for me, because I prepare for it, I'm going to be thinking about it, hopefully I do an okay job, and it'll help me kind of to do that. So it's positive. We think about our first day back to school for us or for the kids. It's another positive stress that hopefully we all get through it. We have the supports of our family, friends, and coworkers. We get through it, we come back the next day, and we do it again, and we're okay. So really thinking about, again, those pieces where we have stress, but it's manageable, we have those supports, and we can get through it. So the next piece of stress we're going to talk about is tolerable. So this is a stress, again, we do have those supports, but it is a longer kind of duration. But in that longer duration, we do know there's an end. So again, if we can get to the weekend, the end of the school year, whatever it is, we know that we can get to that point, and there is an end date. And thinking about chronic or toxic stress, this is stress that we don't have that end date. We never see it ending. We don't know how it's going to end. It could be big stressors or big things in our lives that are happening, such as abuse, or it could be something that is cumulative over time. So it's those little stresses that keep going and going and going and accumulating and eventually take their toll. And again, we don't know when that's going to end. So that sometimes is really hard for us. So thinking again about that in the context of stress, is it positive, tolerable, toxic, is really helpful. And sometimes stress is cumulative and builds over time, as we mentioned. So thinking about, sometimes we have initial stress reaction, we may respond to the stress, or it may be that day, that week. For some people, it may be months later. It may be that thing that is just your tipping point, right? That you have this thing that happens, it's a total little thing, you're driving in traffic, and you're frustrated, and it's a thing that pushes you kind of over. So again, kind of thinking about how stress all affects us differently, and it may be at different points in times. And sometimes it takes time for stress to settle and our symptoms to settle. So again, depending on the stressful events and the accumulation of those, we may experience those effects for quite some time. And also we can be affected by the stress of others. So if we think about in the context of us individually and then our families and communities, all those stresses can affect us. So if we're thinking about our current stressors within the pandemic, our mass tragedies in our province, and different other stressors that are really building up with all of us collectively, that really can take its toll. So we really have to acknowledge that and really be aware of it and try to help ourselves and each other to kind of get through that together. So how deep is the mud? These pups really tell us, so it depends on who you ask, right? So we're all different, and that's okay, and we're all human, and we're all going through this, and we have different life experiences that we come with, different experiences now, and we're all going to be affected differently, and that's okay. And just thinking about that and acknowledging that, and that it is okay that we all go through it differently. We may need different supports, different ways of coping with it. We're all individuals, so we all are going to need something different. So looking at the next piece here in our pie, we're looking at understanding what is the cause of stress, assessing it, again, what's in our control, influence, and what we can't control or influence. So again, we're going to look at those stresses, as I mentioned. Is it positive stress that we're experiencing? Is it tolerable stress that we're experiencing? Is it toxic? And then looking at it from the point of view, again, are we able to control that stress? Are we able to influence it? Or can we not do anything about it, ever or right now? So that's kind of helpful to kind of get us thinking about stress and thinking about, if I'm focusing all my time on things that I can't change, that's going to be really frustrating, right? It's going to be really harder on me. That's going to take its toll over time. So do I kind of switch to saying, you know what, I can actually have more control over this stressor, so I'm going to actually spend more time on that and feel better about that, because I can actually come up with a plan and actually do something about it, have some control about it, some predictability and safety about that. So it's acceptance, right? So it's acceptance is a simple recognition of the truth that is the way things are in this moment. Again, so it may change, but in this moment, this is where we're at, and kind of accepting that and sitting with that and being okay with that and acknowledging that. So the next one is balancing stress by focusing on what's going well. So again, a lot of times, and we're all prone to do this, we're going to look kind of at the negative. So really looking at how do we focus on what is going well in our lives and really taking kind of a grateful approach. Because we know when we focus on the positive, we're going to see the positive more frequently. If we're focusing on the negatives, we're just going to be prone to seeing the negatives in more places. So looking at kind of our inner kind of outside of work lives or with our family and friends, thinking about different pieces of our health. So looking at, is my physical health going really well right now? Is my psychological health going well? Is my family doing really well right now? Am I enjoying time with my loved ones, my friends, my pets? Am I able to, even though I might not like what's going on currently in the world and with the pandemic, do I kind of know what I need to do to be safe? So after all these months, do I kind of know, okay, I have to wear a mask here, I have to do this, when, how do I kind of do that? So we're kind of getting used to the new normal and what we need to do in order to keep safe. So am I comfortable with that now? Do I have some religious or spiritual practices that help me feel happy and safe and focus on what's going well? Do I have the ability to kind of be outdoors and enjoy that? Because we know from the research being outdoors, being in nature, does help our brain to settle and to reduce stress. So am I able to do that, and do I enjoy that? So is that going well? And am I grateful for? And fill in the blank. Again, we're all individuals, so thinking about what we're grateful for can really help us focus again that even in chaos, there are things that are going well. And if we can focus on those, that will really help us kind of reset. And are there other things individually for you that you think are going well and that you want to acknowledge and also focus on? At work, so are things going well at work? Again, even amidst all kind of the chaos and things that may be new to us at work, are there things that are going well? So are there things that I really know how to do in my job? I really know how to do my job well. I really love my job. Nova Scotians really respect what I do in my roles. I have coworkers or people that I can connect with. So if I do have a bad day, I know who I can go to and get that support from. That's really important. So are there things that are going well within the context of this? So the next piece is reduce your exposure to the stress. So I know in my job, I mentioned that I do trauma-informed care and help do care paths for trauma treatment. So a lot of in my day is about trauma, right? So if I go home, I'm watching the news constantly, I'm reading all these books about trauma, all these things, that really takes its toll. So I have to accept in my job, I love my job, I need to do this, I need to be exposed to stress in my job, but are there times outside of my job maybe that I don't need to be? So are there things that I can do? Can I reduce my intake of the news, of social media, of maybe conversations that are about things that I can't control? So that may be helpful to me. Can I talk with the family or loved one about the things, again, that I can control, maybe get some advice that's helpful, that I can feel a bit better about it? And are there relationships that are negative or unhelpful? So thinking about what conversations I may have with those individuals, and is the focus maybe on things that are a bit more in my control or influence versus things that I can't. And again, trying to think about, is it possible to reduce the amount of time with that person? And if it's not, is that something that I have to kind of have a conversation with or deal with in a way that makes sense to me? The next piece is really important, to maintain and kind of build those family and close relationships, because we know from the research that any one person, all we really need to kind of get through all this is that one person that we feel safe with, that we connect with, that we feel trusted with, that we feel believes in us, and we can get through this. And we hope for all of us that we have that one person or maybe many more of those people. So thinking about those people in your lives that really, are your rocks, that at home or at work you can really connect with and get that support from. Because we're all going to have bad days. Some days are going to be great and some days are not. And we're all going to have them. So really thinking about who do we connect with when we're having those bad days? How do we kind of get that support that we need? So again, looking at that, is it all those, people and relationships that we have inside or outside of work that we can do that? Is it the pets? Is it that person who gives that unconditional love when we walk through the door and runs to us that we just want to pet and cuddle? And that's great too. So thinking about how do we, get that support, feel that safety that we really need. And then creating predictability. So we're really thinking about, in times of stress, our brain is really craving for predictability. So we're really looking for some ways that we can schedule things, we can, create that predictability, reduce the sense of chaos and get some control back. So thinking about how do we schedule our days, what can we do in order to plan things out. So thinking about, from the time you wake up to the time you go to sleep, a lot of us have a routine. We really recognize the importance of that for children and youth. So thinking about that for ourselves too. Are there things that, I think, what time am I getting up? What time am I going to bed? What are predictable things throughout my day, throughout my work day that I can kind of count on to kind of be predictable, have some control over, when other things may not be predictable again. So really thinking about what is in our control and what we can do about that. And again, uncertainty is the only certainty within these times. So acknowledging that, right? Again, it's about the acceptance of that. How do we acknowledge that things may be uncertain? How do we sit with that? How do we kind of hold that and acknowledge we're all in this together? So now Prasanna is going to take us through the rest of the slide, some strategies and thinking about your resiliency plan.
Thanks, Holly. So Holly just finished talking about the 6 psychological factors for health, which give you a general guideline around how to think about stress in general. Because stress is, as Holly said, is very natural. We're supposed to feel stress, and if you don't, there could be some concerns in terms of why you're unable to identify your stressors. So stress is okay. It's natural, it's supposed to happen, and now what we want to do is to have a starting point, monitor it, and put some structure around it. So what I'm going to be talking about are some strategies to use for yourself as you create a plan. And we could give you lots and lots and lots of ideas, and we feel like we don't really need to because you're smart, bright people, and you can do that for yourself. However, what has been helpful for us, and I'll speak for myself, for me, is to have a bit of a guide on how to create a personalized plan for myself. So I know what works for me and what doesn't, so when someone says, hey, try this, of course I try it, but if I have strategies or you have strategies that you know work for you, that's A-okay. And if you're thinking about a place to start, here are some ideas that are on this screen. So starting with making a list of things that you're grateful for, and then also making a list of things that that bring you joy. So there is a bit of a difference. When you're thinking about things that bring you joy, I want you to think about things that make you feel good on the inside. Right? And for those of you that may be working with younger children, so elementary or preschool, think of how you might explain that internal feel of regulation or feeling calm and settled to a young child, right? So whether it feels good, feels natural, feels comfortable, and that's what I want you to think of is it's not just the intellectual word of joy, but the internal feeling, what brings you that nice internal feeling. And we've broken it down by in your personal life and in your place of work. And the reason we want to do that, even though you're a professional group, is that as human beings, your brain doesn't really care that you're a professional, right? So as far as your brain's concerned, you're a human being. So in those moments of stress or stressful moments, or even if you're anticipating a stressful moment, what we want to be doing is have access to those reminders that are from all domains of our life. So think about in your personal life, what are you grateful for? What brings you joy? And at work, think of what are you grateful for and what brings you joy. And Holly already gave some examples of things that you may be grateful for or that bring you joy in your workplace. And other things to consider on the bottom grid are items to monitor. So again, these are things that are unique to you. So that's why we haven't populated it. So the first is to think about your body cues, right? So you're the expert on yourself. So I want you to reflect on those body cues that tell you that you're getting, so if you stick to the basics, happy, sad, mad, and think about what are those precursors, right? So what are the body cues that tell you that you're not doing well for any of those emotional states? And if you can identify the first stage, the middle state, and then the last stage, if you want to think about it as the height of your state of dysregulation, that's ideal. And if you can break it down into all of those details, just being even aware of the fact that something's happening to you is what's important. So as human beings, we're not just immune to thoughts and thinking, because that's what makes us quite unique in terms of if we're comparing ourselves to other animals and mammals. So we also had to monitor our thoughts. Right? So Holly talked about that a little bit as well, in terms of are we just perseverating on things that are going wrong for us, that might go wrong for us, or are we just focusing on things that are absolutely going positive or will go positive? So you want to have a bit of a balance. So when we're planning, starting to create a plan, what's helpful is to know what are some of those established thought patterns you have, right? So when do you go down the path of perseveration or focusing too much on negative, or when are those times when you might swing the other way and be overly focused on things that are going positive? In the middle column, row there, so healthy coping strategies that have worked for me in the past. So as I've mentioned, you're not coming into this session without knowing what to do. You absolutely know what works for you, right? So I want you to reflect on things that have worked for you when you've been stressed in the past. And all we're saying is just write it down. So I know you're intelligent people, but the idea is when you're in that moment of having that moment of stress, we want it to be easy, right? So it's the same thing as when you give your students a visual chart or those easy checklists so that they don't have to do the cognitive thinking in the moment. In the middle right row, it's talking about unsafe or unhealthy coping strategies which work. So I'm going to pause there. Unsafe, unhealthy coping strategies which work. So again, you're smart people, you know what those things are, you know what I'm talking about. And the second part of the sentence is, yet I would like to avoid. So the acknowledgement, and Holly talked about acceptance, is this is my coping strategy. It works really well, and I know that it's not the healthiest, it's not the safest, it's not the best thing for me. And then if we were to go beyond yourself, for my family and other people that I interact with. So think about the relational domain as well. And at the bottom left, helpful people, I can ask for help. So in terms of helpful people, I'm sure you can think of lots and lots of people, but I want you to think about people that you can absolutely trust to say anything to and ask anything from, right? So if you're thinking about the way we interact with each other in the midst of a pandemic, so social media is rampant, right? Because that is one of the main ways that we're able to stay in touch with each other. So without labeling any particular social media platform, what I'll say is you may have, I don't know, 1,000 people on your contact list within a certain platform. And out of those 1,000 people, I want you to think, right, who are the people that I absolutely can connect with physically while maintaining a safe distance, that I can call at the drop of a hat and they'll absolutely help, so on and so forth. So I guess what I'm asking you to do is to assess the quality of your relationships if you have lots of people that you can count on. And then the bottom right is professional people or services that I can access to get help. So I'm sure, again, you know who you can go to, but try to sort out, right, if I'm stressed, is there a professional service or a professional I can connect with? Or if I get to a certain level of stress or you're experiencing some dysregulation and you know what's going on in your body, is it time to go and see a healthcare provider or not, right? So the idea here is to put things down on a piece of paper and then create a plan for those intense moments or anticipated stressors that may be coming your way. So when you're thinking about that task of creating a plan, that's still a pretty big task, right? So we're hoping that this is going to be a bit helpful to kind of bring it down a little bit as well and focus it a little bit to give you a bit of a guide that's helpful. So we've broken it down by before, during, and after. And the idea here is to apply this framework for any type of stressor, right? So you can pick a stressor that you're experiencing right now, that you're anticipating you're going to experience later on, and the idea is to create a plan before you get to that stressor or experience it, and then also plan on some strategies you're going to use while you're in the midst of that stressor, right? And then after the stressor is over or the event is done, thinking about, right, what am I going to do at the end of it? So if you're thinking about the tolerable stress that and positive stress Holly talked about, some things that some people that are listening and watching could be thinking is, oh, September 8th, students are going to walk into the classroom, right? So if you're thinking that might be stressful, so we're not saying it's definitely stressful for everyone, but it may be a concern for some people. So if September 8th is your anticipated stressor, then the idea is to plan for it. And then during, the idea is while you're at work, you know, having a list of strategies or coping strategies that you know work for you, and other important thing is that you can do at your place of work, right? So thinking ahead of how to kind of plan for that. And then at the end of the day, so if I stick with the first day of school idea, so at the end of the day, what am I going to do regardless of if I actually experience stress or not. So that's another thing to think about as well, is even though we might anticipate experiencing something as stressful, when you actually get to that point, whether because you plan for it or because it actually isn't a stressor in the moment, you may actually not need the plan at all, right? But if you do need a plan, what we need to do is to make sure that after it's done, you reassess not just the plan, but also make a different plan if needed for the next time you may experience that stressor. So I talked about a stressor that is on my mind because some of my close friends have young children and they're getting ready to go back to school on the 8th. So the idea is, please personalize this for yourself. The other thing I'll say about this is that it doesn't have to be a whole work day, right? So you can chunk it up. It could be the drive to your place of employment on the first day. So you might be thinking, maybe there's going to be traffic, maybe there's going to be some construction that'll slow me down, or it could be something bigger. So Holly talked about, for tolerable stress, it could be 5 minutes, 15 minutes a week, end of the school year. But the idea is, depending on the time, you want to take that into account. All right, so let's get into some strategies. So we've set it up as a grid, and you can feel free to duplicate this, create your own grid, customize it as much as you want. So on the gray column there are potential stressors. So it can be a small stressor, it can be something that's significant. Oh, right, the other thing I want to say is, in terms of anticipating stress, it might not just be going to work, it could also be stressors in your personal life, right? So as I said, I know some friends who have children in school still, and some of the stressors they've been talking about is not even that their children are going to school, but then thinking about, oh, when my children go to school, now I go to work, and that's a different, might be a different stressor that they're anticipating, right? So yeah, and then the first column is strategies to use before planning for it. And then strategies to use definitely as you're in the midst of whatever that time period is, and then things to do after. And as Holly mentioned earlier, when you're creating this plan or the list, it's really important to assess each strategy to see if it's definitely something within your control, right? So for example, if I go back to my example of traffic, yes, I can have multiple routes planned, and we're not going to know what's going to happen until the morning of, right? So the idea is, if you're thinking, right, I had the perfect plan picked or route picked, maybe that's not going to be completely in your control, because you can control what other people do on that day. So now what we're going to do is similar to what Holly did, is to spend a little bit of time focusing on some specific recommendations. So I just want to be clear again, these are just recommendations, general strategies, and it's up to you to think about what actually works for you. So if you're thinking about what is the goal here, right? So what am I planning for? Yes, reduce stress. But then remember, Holly said it, I said it multiple times, we're saying stress is natural, it's supposed to happen. So we can't say, I want to get rid of stress, because that's just not going to happen. So if we're thinking about a goal, this is something that we use with the staff that we train, is to do our job well while staying well. And Holly already mentioned this earlier. So the first part of that quote, do our job well. So we don't need to teach you how to do that, because you're the professional, you already know what to do, right? You know how to run a classroom, you know how to do your job if you're an administrator or a support staff. But then what we want you to consider is, how can you keep doing the excellent work you're doing, delivering the excellent care that you're providing, while staying well for yourself, right? So thinking about, when you're creating the plan, how do I do both? One other thing to consider when you're thinking about, right, what is the goal, what am I trying to do here, is not just your physical safety in terms of making sure you have a mask, knowing how to wipe down surfaces, so on and so forth, but it's also thinking about that idea of wellness, right? So when you're thinking about wellness and workplaces, a term that connects the two is compassion satisfaction. So here, this term is talking about what brings you joy. So if you remember a couple of slides ago, I talked about listing things that bring you joy and listing things that you're grateful for. And what research has shown, and what people that are engaged even in treatment and therapy have said, is it's really remembering things that I like about what I'm doing that's been helpful, right? So for a professional like yourself, you know, in those moments where you're thinking, why am I even here? Why did I choose this career? is to say, right, so accept that feeling because that's a perfectly natural feeling, and then try to balance it out with, why did I pick this career, right? And you may have to think back a few years depending on when you started, or not. But the idea is when you have a thought that's not very helpful or it's very stressful, is try to remind yourself why you're actually doing it in the first place. And then the next thing to plan for or think about is self-compassion. Right? So here we're saying compassion satisfaction, which is focused on the type of work, and so it's a bit more tangible. And here we're talking about the internal experience. Right? So and so remember, this is the before. So we're still planning for this. So the first column is talking about self-kindness. So you're adults, bright people, you might be thinking, why is this guy talking about self-kindness? The reason we want to talk about self-kindness is because that's an unnatural thing to do, specifically for people that are in caregiving fields, right? So I'm not saying all people, but it's something that doesn't come as naturally when we're so used to taking care of clientele, whether it's, and in terms of the clientele, it could be students, it could be the teachers. So if you're a principal or an administrator, it could maybe the people you're taking care of aren't students, but it's the staff that report to you. It could be the caregivers, the parents that you have to interact with. And if you are an administrator within the department or within one of the centers, it could be lots and lots of staff that you're looking out for or caring for. Right? So that word caring doesn't have to be hands-on, oh, I'm teaching someone how to tie shoelaces. I want you to think about relationships. Right? So when you're thinking about self-kindness, the idea here is, even though it might feel unnatural, is think about, what do I need? How can I be kind to myself? How can I forgive myself first so that now I can be compassionate and caring towards other people? The middle column, it talks about common humanity, which is stress is everywhere. So we already said, scientifically, it's natural. If you're thinking about it more globally than that, there is suffering, right? So all human beings experience suffering, not just because there's a pandemic, not just because some really significant things have happened in this province and around the world, but because there's suffering everywhere all the time. So what we had to be thinking about is, right, so go back to that idea of, is this something I can control or not? And then if you think you can control it, make a plan. If it's not something you think you can control, accept it, and then maybe create some coping strategies so that you can be comfortable with being able to sit with accepting something that's obviously not pleasant or natural. And the last column is talking about mindfulness. So I know that's not something new to folks, especially these days, and maybe it is to some folks. And there's lots and lots of different understandings of what mindfulness is, right? So some people think it's being a monk, meditating for 14 hours a day, and that's it. That's one version of it. And then there's the other end of the spectrum, which is talking about, right, it's not just the sitting meditation, but it's actually the practical application that's crucial, right? So all that to say, as someone working for the Department of Education, it's absolutely possible to be mindful as you're doing your daily work. So this slide is just a summary of things to think about. If you had to make a list, and again, these are recommendations, you can edit, change as needed. But from the top to the bottom is to refer to your personal strategies. So that's the slide with the blue grids that I started off with. And then set an intention for the day. So intentions and goals are a little bit different. They sound similar, but they're a little bit different. For intentions, I want you to think, rather than a tangible thing, I want you to think something that you may be able to experience, right? So what did the day feel like versus I got to 4:30? What was my first session with the students? What did the first session with my students feel like versus I made it to recess, right? So making it to recess is a good thing, but in terms of intention, I want you to think that feeling that you're going to be paying attention to. Scheduling social time with someone. So Holly talked about scheduling, and scheduling is really important, especially in this pre-planning stage, right? So social time can be with a peer, which is important. So you are at your place of work, so it's important to reconnect with people that you may not have seen for a while, in person at least, while maintaining physical distancing, and then also planning for connecting with people after you go home, right? So Holly talked about relationships and maintaining close family relationships as being a key factor, and this is where we want you to actually now plan to do that. Identify at least one thing you're grateful for that brings you joy. Schedule time for physical activity, nature, after your day. Again, might seem silly to write this down. I know when I've been providing direct patient care, it was actually quite helpful for me to have a plan like this for moments in my career when things were not going the way I wanted them to, or it felt like I wasn't really in control of my workplace or my personal life. And then for that one in particular, actually for all of these, we're saying take into account your personal and family commitments, right? So you might be thinking, gee, thanks, Prasanna, but when I go home, I'm not just walking into an empty space and I can meditate all night long. So we realize that, right? So, but the key is to make time for yourself. Move your body or stretch, ideally in nature. So what neuroscience tells us is that especially if you experience stress and you're dysregulated, one of the main things that'll get you back to a state of regulation, or for those of you that are used to the zone system, is, so getting back to green zone from yellow zone, or if you're in the red zone to yellow zone, is to actually do something physical, right? So to co-regulate, make sure that you catch up with the pace of your body, and then systematically start to slow yourself down. And then breathe intentionally and deeply. So again, may not be new news to a lot of you, but I know even in some of the sessions that we do now, people say, breathing, what's the big deal? Don't you breathe all day long? And the answer is yes, which is why we're saying intentionally, right? So paying attention to your breath. So the feel of the breath on your upper lip, feel of the breath on your mouth if you're using the mouth to breathe. Feel of the breath as it gets to your belly, feel of the breath as it leaves your belly, your mouth, your nose, so on and so forth. And then deeply, meaning consciously breathe in until your diaphragm pushes down and pops your belly out. So just some specific guidance on breathing intentionally and deeply. So the next category is during. Right? So remember, it could be a short event, it could be a long event, it doesn't really matter, but the idea is to have some things pre-planned. And then even if you haven't had some things pre-planned, the idea is to know, right, what works for me, what doesn't, because when you're working in environments like you do, we know that you might have the best plan and that might not work out at all, right? So you have to be ready to deal with whatever comes up unless your physical safety is compromised. And and if that's the case, or you're anticipating that, what I'd encourage you to do is to have a plan for that and connect with your leadership folks ahead of time as well. So so again, recommendations for during, it says give yourself a shake and move. So in terms of giving yourself a shake and move, what we're trying to do, again, is to get the point across is that idea of regulation, right? So whether it's going for a walk, ideally around the building, ideally long walk, so that you can get your heart rate up. So not to the rate where you're, similar to when you're running, but to a point where it's definitely elevated from when you're sitting down. And if you're somebody who works with students, that can even be standing up from your desk, if that's possible, and the walk could literally be, meandering through your classroom. If you're not someone who works with students, it could be taking the long route to go to the bathroom, right? So taking the long route to go to a different photocopier, so on and so forth. Or rather than going to the intercom or using a phone or email, actually getting up and walking to talk to somebody. So when I say shake or move in the midst of your workday, do what you can, but the idea is to move your body. Turn up the corners of your mouth. So there's actual science to show that if we make this, I probably look silly, the smiling face, it triggers certain neurological responses that makes your brain experience that feeling. So not the joy that you're experiencing when you're actually joyful, but it gives your brain that sense of stillness and calmness. Stretch, dance, and walk the stairs. So stretching and dancing again, feel free to do whatever works for you. And if you're thinking, I can't dance in front of my students, well, they might like it. You might get a YouTube video made out of it. So, watch out for that, for cell phones. But the idea is to make it fun. And if you do activities with your students in the classroom that involve them moving around, so maybe it could be yoga, it could be recess time, it could be gym, what I'll encourage you to do is to join in with the students, right? So if you have the ability, if you're physically able to do that. And if you don't work with students, think of, right, how can I get my heart rate up without actually going for a run? If you're able to go for a run or do some exercise, go for it. The next consideration is to tap in, tap out. So what we're trying to get across here is to take a break, if possible, if safe. and also to monitor your body cues so that you ask for help before you actually need a break. Right? If that happens, it's not a big deal. Absolutely ask for help. If you are asking for help, again, thinking about your professional role, your title, your years of experience, and try to let go of all that. Right? So I'm speaking from experience where there have been times in my career when I was doing direct care where I absolutely needed a break, or I knew I needed a break, and I didn't ask for a break because I was a senior staff, or because I could tell everybody else was also super busy. Right? So we're saying, yes, take the current conditions and circumstances into account, and yet pay attention to your body, ask for help before you actually need it, take a break before you actually need it, if at all possible. And in terms of mindfulness, so we talked about mindfulness in the before slide. So when during the stressor, it's possible to try to be mindful, right? So those of you that are used to mindfulness, this will feel natural. And if you're not, that's why I started off by saying mindfulness doesn't have to be sitting still for 14 hours in a monastery, right? Mindfulness can happen anywhere. And in the midst of your workday or your stressor, that mindful moment could literally be, am I safe right now? Is everything okay right now? Yes, it could potentially be more stressful or potentially dangerous later on, but that's the future state, right? So forget about the past in the moment. Is everything okay right now? And remind yourself, I'm okay. And this is also a good place to think about things that you're grateful for and things that bring you joy. And for those times when you're like, yeah, mindfulness is great, and I can go to that place of being in the moment. There is lots and lots of strategies that you can do physically, similar to walking, that may help, right? So again, I want to say these may not work for everybody, but please give it a try if you're not already doing this. So we really like this activity. So it's called 54321. My counting's down right. Grounding technique, and the idea here is to think about your 5 senses, right? So it doesn't matter if you want to start with 5 things you see or start with 5 things you taste. But the idea is to pay attention to each of your 5 senses so that you give your brain a break if it's safe. I know I keep saying if it's safe, and many folks know what I'm talking about, but the idea is, if at all possible, try to reconnect with your body. And then, again, if you're thinking about your state of dysregulation and, right, I can't even pay attention to my body, what we know works best is breath, right? Because breath is so important, well, to stay alive. Focusing on your breath is a really, really good reset. So this is a lovely exercise that we like. Some of you may be familiar with this if you're doing this with your students as well. And the idea here is to breathe in for 4, and you can even count out quietly in your head, hold for 4, breathe out for 4, and then hold for 4, and then start over. Right? And so I did this just for the purpose of the camera. I've done this lots and lots of times, and I'm counting, or I have my hand in my pocket, and I'm doing one of these. Right? So I had the feel, I'm engaging my sense of feel, but I'm coaching myself through the breathing. So again, strategies, and all we've done here is to put those down into a grid, and please feel free to edit as needed. So we talked about a lot of these already. Moving your body. Oh, drinking water whenever possible. So similar to moving your body, what we know is that, well, I'm sure you folks know this as well, it's common knowledge, we're mainly made up of water, right? And when we tend to get stressed or dysregulated, our bodies generally tend to get heated up, and that expends energy. And can cause our bodies to heat up, right? So what we want to do is to always stay hydrated, even if you're not going for a run. Want to always think about drinking water, and if you're in the midst of a stressful situation, or even if you're anticipating a stressful situation, try to make sure that you always have some water on hand. The next one down there is trust yourself and your training. So Holly talked about it, I talked about it, you're the expert in what you do, and when you're in a state of dysregulation or a stressful moment, it might feel like, I don't even know what to do, I don't remember what to do, and that may be really valid and true, because what we know is that it can be hard to access intellectual or complex information if we can't access our prefrontal cortex. Right? But in those moments, similar to reminding yourself about things that you're grateful for or things that you're joyful for, this is something else you can tell yourself. I'm a teacher, I'm a principal, I'm a support staff, I'm whatever EPA, whatever your profession is, I know what to do and I'm good at it, or else I wouldn't be here. And then we talked about being forgiving, kind and compassionate to yourself. So start with yourself before you think about others. And then practice mindfulness and grounding techniques. And then now we're at the third phase here, so things to do after. Right? So here we're going to start off with the first recommendation is from 10 is called walk, talk, and flush. And so we've talked about the components already, right? So moving your body is the walking piece. Drinking water is the flushing piece. And the science behind this is to, well, regulate. And then thinking about the fact that if I need to even talk to a peer about something or talk to a principal or another resource person about something that just happened, yes, you can get through that conversation, and there may be times where you may need to regulate first. Right? And what this model or a bit of theory is saying is, don't wait for those times when you're really dysregulated and you go, right, I better go for a walk first. I better do some mindfulness first. They're saying start with the regulation and then go to that cognitive processing piece. If you do have to talk things through, process things quickly, so I don't work in the environments, but I have a very good idea of the types of work that you folks do, is to have that conversation while both of you are walking. Right? Now again, may not be possible for one or the other, but if at all possible to say, hey, is it possible for me to have 5 minutes of your time? And then as you're talking for those 5 minutes, go for a walk, while obviously keep maintaining confidentiality and privacy of student information. The next thing leads in from there, which is low impact debriefing. So the idea here is, we're using the word debriefing, so I don't want you to think it's a major event and now we're debriefing. I want you to think about any event that gives you that feeling, whether it's internal feeling or an intellectual cognitive feeling or a policy that says after this type of an event, we have to debrief. I'm also talking about day-to-day events where you're feeling like, that didn't feel right. I'm not sure if I did that the way I was supposed to, so I need to check in with someone, right? So you can easily replace low-impact debriefing with a check-in processing, whatever the language that you're used to. And one of the key factors in terms of the low-impact debriefing is being mindful as you're approaching someone to ask for that time from them to process things. Right? The first thing is, right, who am I going to ask for help from? So remember, we made a list, right? But the recognition here is that when you're at your place of work, it may not be your best friend. It may not be your dad or another loved one that you can have access to, because policies, procedures, confidentiality, the guideline may be you have to talk to the principal or guidance counselor or EAP, whatever your protocols are. Or it could even be a peer in the next classroom or in the next office. The idea is, before I approach somebody, to be mindful of, what am I asking them for? Am I asking them to just listen and just that's it? Or am I asking them for help after I tell them what's going on or what I need help with? So the idea is, tell them what you're looking for. And then the next thing to be mindful of or plan is, as I'm telling the person whatever it is I need help with or the situation that I just experienced, is to think about how much do they really need to know. Right? So am I saying, well, first he said this, and then she said that, and then I did this, and then he did this, and then she did that, and then this happened. So do I want to get into all the individual pieces, or do I want to give an overall description of the event, and then describe what my personal experience was, and then whether it's asking for help or just saying, thank you so much for listening, and that's it. Right? So that's the next step. On the flip side, if you are the person that's being approached from someone who wants to talk to you, that has to report to you, the idea here is, again, to be mindful and conscious of, right, what else are you managing in that moment? And then thinking, do you actually have 5 minutes to talk to this person? And giving yourself permission to say no. Right? So when we do the bigger version of this, which is called Building Compassion, Satisfaction, and Resiliency, we talk about that quite a bit, which is it's okay to say no, even though it might feel terrible, because we're so used to helping people, right? And especially when we are in fields like the folks that are on this session, it can feel even more of a challenge to say, no, I can't really talk to you right now, or it's actually not a good time. So those are the two main things. And then in terms of the wrap up, is to make sure for the low impact debriefing of the processing is to do a bit of a check-in. So I'm not talking about a check-in which is, right, what's your to-do list, what's my to-do list, go team, and then separate. What I'm talking about is a bit of an emotional check-in with each other as well, right? So how did that feel for you? How are you doing before you separate? And then transition times, right? So remember, you could be doing a lot of this planning in the before, but we've kind of broken it down. So similar to the students and the staff that work, if you have staff that report to you, there's lots and lots of opportunities for transitions. Right? And if you're thinking about working in a school or a classroom or an office setting, what we know is that at least the day will end, right? There may be some days that might feel like it goes on and on and on. You may not be able to go home when you're supposed to, so we're not talking about those situations. We're talking about every day. You do get to go home. So as you're going home, whether it's a 2-minute walk or a 2-hour drive or however you get home, what we're saying is have some things already figured out that work for you. Right? So it could be something as simple as saying, right, so for me, I have about a 30-minute drive home, is saying, right, today I'm going to blast music and sing along horribly, but I want that upbeat feeling or sensory input. Or maybe today's a day where I turn the radio off altogether, drive home in silence. Or maybe I pop in a CD of mindfulness. Or maybe this is a day where on my drive home, I talk to a loved one or a friend that's also free to talk with me. So the idea is to try and maximize that time that you spend from between one activity to another. So going home from work, could be a significant amount of time, but you could also plan for transition times during work, right? So if you're in a school where you're around students and there's recess and you don't have to monitor recess, you might think, right, those 15 minutes, what can I do? Lunch, unless you have an assigned task, what can I do? And then at the end of the day, between the time students go home and the time you go home for yourself, think, what can I do there as well, right? So the idea is carve those times out and schedule activities as much as possible. The last thing is home is also thinking about strategies you're going to use once you get home, right? So this is in the pre-planning phase, and remember I said, don't forget about the fact that you may have other people living in your home or pets or other responsibilities, so you have to take that into account as well. And then finishing off with self-compassion. So we talked about self-compassion already, self-kindness, self-love, and mindfulness. So you want to end by saying that after assessing your plan, after getting through whatever the event was, go back to a place of stillness, of love, and kindness for yourself, because everybody is doing the best they can, right? So regardless of the outcome of the event is now in the past. If you're taking a mindful approach, yes, it didn't go as planned, but it's in the past. I'm here and now I can plan for the future. So we'll end there in terms of recommended strategies, and then the last slide here again is a list of ideas that we came up with. And if you notice, there are a lot of items, so like monitoring your body cues and thoughts that we started off with, right? So you can pre-plan this into all 3 sections, or as I said, if your plan didn't go as planned, you can go back to it and say, right, next day, what am I going to do? So today I didn't really catch myself as I got to yellow zone or became upset or sad or overly excited. So tomorrow, if it happens, what are the body cues that I'm going to pay attention to? And towards the middle there, it says, depending on the day, give yourself a break and take it easy. Right? So that could be something as simple as if you've made plans to go and do something social. So remember, we're saying relationships, connect with people safely. So you might have plans with a sibling, with a partner, with your family to go do something, and you might say, you know what, today's not the day for it. Right? Today is the day where I just need to do something if you have to be with your family, but maybe not get dressed, think about physically distancing, masks, hand sanitizers, and go on this big outing. Right? So that's the idea, is it's okay to change your plan depending on how you're feeling or what you need. Covered the rest of it. Replace electronic usage with outdoor time. So Holly talked about that in the context of reducing stress. And in this stage, what we want you to think about is the fact that whenever you look at a screen, like you're doing now, your brain's activated, right? So when you go home, yes, you may need to check in with family electronically, you may need to watch the news, you may need to read emails from your administrators or leaders, but other than the required tasks, we're saying try to get away from screen time. And spend time in nature as much as possible, which is hopefully is going to help your brain to regulate a bit more. So in terms of general takeaways and in closing, I want to focus on a few key items. So the first things to think about are, from a personal perspective, is acceptance, right? So you don't have to like it at all, but thinking about, right, this is what's happening right now in this moment. And especially if you can't change it, you have to accept that. And then being kind to yourself, right? Acceptance is first, and then being kind to yourself and your experience of it. So if the feeling is, I don't know, icky, yucky, horrible, it's okay. Because whatever you're feeling, you're supposed to feel whatever you're feeling. And then after you forgive yourself, accept it to whatever degree you can, then getting a bit more specific and really thinking about problem solving and saying, right, do I even have the energy to address this? Do I even want to address this? And if it's yes and yes, then think, okay, so I have the energy, I'm interested in addressing this, but is it in my control now? And if it's not in your control, no judgment, accept that. So that's another time to go back to, I need to accept the fact that I'm not in control of this situation, and then move on from there. And then hopefully this idea of planning ahead with strategies to do before, during, and after was helpful for folks as well. So in terms of resources, we were thinking about things to direct you folks to, and we could have filled multiple slides full of resources. So rather than do that, what we thought of doing is to direct you to the Nova Scotia Health Authority's public website, because we thought, okay, let's stay in our lane, which is health. So the first website is for the public website for Nova Scotia Health Authority. The second website is a sub-page of that around stress. So there are some excellent resources there, some similar messages that we talked about will be there, and there are some adult-specific services and free resources on that page as well. And then the third resource there is the IWK public website as well. And then at the bottom are a couple of references for the material that we used to put this session together. And just wanted to thank you for your time in watching. And we realize there's lots going on in terms of things, you may be able to control or not. You might be thinking, oh no, a webinar on top of everything. So we appreciate your time. Thank you so much for listening. And we want to acknowledge that the great work you're doing, we appreciate you, the students appreciate you, the families appreciate you. I want to thank you for listening.